you can see that pendulum will come back the other way. And I think we're going to be restored to a more organic, natural human existence, and not this artificiality of modernity that we've come to, find ourselves kind of stuck in.
All right, and welcome to the next episode of Paradigms Lost and Found. I'm John Michael Dumais here with Frank Natoli. We're both participants in Rise Up New Hampshire and the Collaborative Communities Coalition. And, we usually meet and do relatively unscripted discussions about what's happening in the national, international, economic, and political world. And I have to say, Frank, at the time of this taping, which is Thursday, September 8th, 2022, all the wheels seem to be coming off the bus. So how you doing, man?
Okay, how you doing?
All right. So, we've got so much that we could talk about here. Obviously, uppermost probably for a lot of people heading into the winter months is the latest news of the energy crunch. This is not only something that's happening in the EU, where it's being widely publicized after Putin said, no more natural gas for you, thank you very much, until you stop doing sanctions. But we're, of course, seeing things here in the States as well, and in New Hampshire as well. And I hope to get to some of those details here as well. So, what are you seeing here, and what kind of sense are you making of especially the situation in Europe? And I guess we'll cover that and transition to how that affects us here, because as we well know, everything's connected, and we're not going to fly under the radar or anything like that. That will not happen.
Yeah, I mean, it's kind of hard to make sense of it, to wrap your head around the scope of it. I mean, we're seeing the stories of these astronomical energy bills. We've seen the posts of the business owners with the 9,000 euro, for 1 month worth of service. Completely untenable. I saw, maybe you saw this too. There was a clip of some kind of game show, I think in the UK, where they were competing to have their energy bills paid for. Clown world on crack, basically. So how do you make sense of it? I mean, a lot of the things that run through my mind, looking back, we had World War II, just as an example, and nobody dealt with anything like this. How could that be? How could we have World War II happening along the global stage and not have the kind of energy crisis that we have today? Because Russia went across the border into Ukraine, and now all of a sudden the world's energy system is just completely falling apart. They went right across their border. I mean, the United States, along with its allies, wreaked havoc across the entire Middle East for over a decade. And we never dealt with any of this. And that's essentially the heart of the global energy system comes from the Middle East. And we didn't deal with it. So how do we make sense of this? I mean, it seems very contrived. It seems like ordered chaos. And I suspect what will probably happen, and this is going to get back into the economics of it, is that they will let it get so far, as far as they could push it, and they will start to begin to offer some kind of relief to first households, and then it's going to be eventually they'll work their way over to businesses. But by the time they do that, you will see all of these businesses gone forever. And this is watching wealth transfer happen in real time. I mean, there was a pub, I think it was in the UK, 1,200-year-old pub that's closing. This pub survived 1,200 years as a pub, and it can't survive this.
Party's over, man.
The party's over.
No,
yeah, and they're telling you.
No more pints for you. It's I've certainly been tuning into what's happening in the EU. It does seem like a clusterfuck of amazing proportions, given what's their, I guess, forced buy-in to the sanctions. Of course, people buying oil under the or outside of the U.S. dollar for oil system. We know about the BRICS countries that have been going online. Really, they've been in development for at least a dozen years, I think, and as an alternative or anti-dollar system. We should probably touch on that as well. But and of course, the whole European Central Bank fiasco, which Charles Hugh Smith also talked about pretty well in one of his recent articles, talking about sort of neocolonialism and neo-feudalism, kind of these central banks, exporting their debt to peripheral countries, which can't keep up with it, which then results in, this over-leveraged countries, which then result in them not being able to pay their debts, which then results in techno-feudalism or debt surfing. It's very hard to get our mind around what their plan is. It does seem to me like it's connected to a depopulation agenda, as much as that seems like a wide-eyed tinfoil hat for some listeners, probably not any on our channel. But I mean, how are people supposed to survive this? And if they do, as you were saying, bail out homeowners and businesses, with what exactly are they going to do that? Are they going to print more money? That's really the basis of the inflation and the devaluing of currencies, it seems to me. So I don't know. It does seem like there isn't really a plan in place. I mean, you're here in the United States, you're looking at similar things, and while Biden refuses to let certain oil production capacity be developed, and pushing a green agenda very strongly, is that there aren't really alternatives. I mean, we can't roll out a thorium reactor faster than maybe a decade, and we can't. The renewables are not going to keep up. You need battery capacity for that. We're already overmining the world for those batteries, and those batteries have their own half-lives, 10 years or so, and you have to replace those batteries. So, what is the plan here? What is the end game, do you think, regarding energy? What do you think the controllers are up to?
I saw an image that somebody took on the road, turned into a meme. And it was an image of a Tesla on a highway. The Tesla had a little hitch attached to the back. Would you care to guess what it was carrying in that hitch?
Gas cans? I don't know what.
A gas generator.
A gas generator. Yeah. Well, you've seen California now just recently, right? They've been pushing electric vehicles, and they have now all electric by 2035, is it? But at the
Yep.
same time, now they're
Well,
asking
new vehicles. Yeah.
all for new vehicles, and at the same time now they're asking electric vehicle owners not to fill up because, of course, it's all based on fossil fuel generating electricity, largely. I mean, obviously, renewables in the United States is maybe 10 or 11% right now, but still, I mean, you can't. The intermittent nature of renewables means you can't have renewables when you need them. Typically, here in this part of the country, for heat and for nighttime
Right.
stuff that you need, it's just not functional. And then, of course, we've seen here in New Hampshire the electric prices gone up 116% for supply charges when we're not getting any of our supply as it is from natural gas, coal, or nuclear. It's almost all renewable. And so what is that all about? That's another crazy thing. And I used to, I had for a number of years, I was getting my supply from Smart Energy, because you can do that in New Hampshire. You can go get your supply from somebody else, and you'll still pay the delivery charges, obviously, through Eversource or whatever your supplier is, but your local supplier. But I used to, save a few cents per kilowatt hour when I did that. And I called them the other day and said, hey, it costs 22 whatever cents now per kilowatt hour, more than doubled. What can you do for me? Oh, we can offer you 24 cents per kilowatt hour. And I'm saying, now, all of your sources are from renewables. How is it that you just doubled your prices? Well, that's what the market will bear,
It's disgraceful. I have a mind to file a lawsuit against Eversource. I mean, they supply me. I'd like to see maybe flesh them out and have them actually get on the record and explain how they justify it. I had an opportunity. I was at a function, a boat function with the Sullivan County Bar here in New Hampshire. My wife is a member, and I was talking to one of the judges who just a few years ago was the commissioner for public utilities here in New Hampshire. And I said, I got a bone to pick with that agency, with that commission. I said, how do they do this? He says, well, he goes, I got to tell you, he goes, our hands are tied. He goes, we have no choice but to allow them to increase so long as they have a justifiable explanation. Like if they can say, for example, our costs have increased, therefore we must now increase. He goes, we can't say no. We can't just say no. You gotta, But to your point, how could they possibly have increased by this amount? It just something doesn't add up to me. I mean, maybe I'm wrong. I'm not saying I can't be wrong, but they made mention they're going to note this on your bill. When you get your bill, you're going to see they're going to talk about it, right? They're going to say that increase, yada yada, costs, yada yada. But I'm not seeing the justification either. I mean, you're talking about, I think it's 112%. I mean, that's insane. And maybe I can afford that, maybe you could afford that, but you know how many people in this state will simply not be able to afford it? And there's very few people who are just gonna, shrug their shoulders at it. I mean, it's gonna add up to a significant amount of money for most households. No matter how you slice it, you're talking about hundreds of dollars for most households that they would not otherwise be spending on electricity at a time when we know the vast majority of people have no savings, they're living paycheck to paycheck. It's disgraceful. And you have to also examine where all this money goes. There is no other way for these concerned entities to save money. I mean, it just doesn't it doesn't add up.
Well,
it seems very exploitive.
it seems to be from the research that I've been able to do, which is really based on other people's research. Good Granite Croc article on it called "The Real Reason Eversource Raised Its New Hampshire Electric Rates 110%."
Tell me what you know.
I think it was 116% actually. Well, some of what I've been telling you is comes from this article, but the point being, in 2012, New Hampshire got about 60% of its energy from coal. Now it's zero, and then about 1/3 from natural gas. Now it's zero. Eversource actually divested itself of all of its self-generation capacity in New Hampshire, which they build at around 10 cents per kilowatt hour, and is now replacing it with about 22.5 cents. from three companies that are intimately tied to the Great Reset. So we're talking about BlackRock and Vanguard owned companies, or majority owned companies, that are into the green energy thing, which is renewables, probably including things like biomass, which is not, you call it a renewable, but it's if anyone has seen the movie Planet of Humans by Michael Moore, and don't blush when you hear Michael Moore, because he really holds the Green New Deal people to task for what they've done, and in terms of really strip mining and burning the planet, as like that's the response. So it doesn't make any sense. We can agree that it would be great to get beyond fossil fuels, but we're not there yet. If you were running a company and you were saying, well, let's get our stuff, you would take whatever measures and have a project plan for whatever amount of time. It would be 25, 30 years to make the transition. There would be proper investments, there would be studies, and how we're getting the energy. And if it's renewable, you have to be able to store that energy. If it's thorium or fusion, you've got to obviously deal with the lead time for those. I've been studying alternative and over unity, aka free energy stuff, for a lot of years, and it's pretty clear that there are breakthrough energy stuff. Even Catherine Austin Fitz talks about groups in Norway and other places working with breakthrough energy kind of technology, but it's not there yet. You can't just say, "Oh, let's get rid of it all," and rely on what exactly? So there's like it's Sorcerer's Apprentice kind of stuff. There's no intelligent person planning this. They're like forcing it on us by fiat, and of course it's, as you were saying, it looks like, and it's in Germany. Was it Germany and other EU countries? They're like, no, you have to cut back. They're telling companies you've got to cut back your energy use. Well, what does that mean for production? I'm sure they can shut off a few lights at night, probably, but what does that mean for their production capacity? What they're able to do. So I don't see this going to any kind of a good place, and it seems like part of a design, along with the other supply chain stuff, the food shortages, the closing of a lot of the metal factories, metal smelting, and all over the world over the last couple of years. The forced water shortages, and redirections, and we've seen some of that, like in Oregon, where they've redirected it away from essentially from farms that are producing food. It does seem like either stupidity or planned,
No, definitely not stupidity.
Well, it is stupid, but it does seem planned. It's stupid from our point of view, from any kind of managerial point of view. Unless they're trying to really upset the apple cart and depopulate and make everybody a debt serf with central bank digital currencies and that sort of thing. I mean,
they're not ready for that either. I mean, this is all interesting because this is all being thrown at us at the same time. But as you point out, the structure is not there for any of it. Even the CBDCs that they're touting now, they want to get the underlying structure by 2023. Will it be Ethereum? Will it be XRP? I don't know. They're going to have to use something that's already in the works because there's no way they'll be able to create something in that period of time. They don't have that. So it's going to be very interesting. They're so far from actually being able to execute something like that right now that I don't, and even if they did, plan on it being a catastrophe and not working. This is all it's very interesting because I wondered if a lot of what's happening on the energy front is really suppressing, ultimately a tactic to suppress demand at large, to keep the fiat currency system from hyperinflating, a la Weimar Germany kind of style, right? We're seeing hyperinflation in subtle ways, not really, maybe I shouldn't use the word hyperinflation, but we're definitely up well over 100% in a lot of sectors. I mean, everybody knows this if they shop. What are you paying for chicken? What did you pay for chicken, a year ago? Lots of things. Certainly you see it we saw it through asset classes for some decades, and now we're seeing it in many different sectors, and particularly you could say hyperinflating the energy sector in Europe, right? I mean, to your point, nothing will operate. I mean, if there is no system in place to move into. So the order of the day is chaos, right? I mean, it's essentially the creation of chaos. I have to assume to create vulnerabilities. Maybe there is an economic explanation, as I posited, that could be partially to decrease demand at large, but I think even in a more onerous way, to create such vulnerabilities in the populations that we are left to a in a very really fearful state, very susceptible to governmental manipulation. I mean, this to me just seems to be the explanation. There's not, there's no good explanation for any of this. Otherwise, nothing about it makes sense at all. And I think, I mean, you could march in 100 high school children. Not that I'm belittling high school kids, but you could get a bunch of high school kids that'll tell you the same thing. Oh, I just see a note just popped up here that the Queen has died. The Queen of England has died. Interesting. 96
Wow.
years old.
Wow.
Yeah. That's going to be interesting to see what happens there with the monarchy.
Seriously. Yeah.
Yeah, the monarchy can die with her, as far as I'm concerned.
Well,
but,
it's the bloodline families that's all about, right? And the control that they still exercise through the central banks. Well, to your point earlier about demand destruction, and Charles Hugh Smith brings this up in one of his recent essays about depression and inflation. He says that the Fed can't stop supply side inflation because at times of abundance, it might work to kind of to increase the basis points for bank money, but not in areas of scarcity when there's a supply side supply constraints. So like when there's food, energy, and fresh water, for example, are supply constrained. Money tightening won't do anything for inflation. It's gonna kind of just I mean, what the Fed has done and for the devaluation of money, obviously around printing money that's not really there. That's one thing. And if they could stop doing that, I suppose. But we're in a place where a lot of critical needs are not in great supply, and food shortages caused by drought and extremes of weather, don't help us from getting hungry or stop really or undo kind of central bank created problems that we seem to be having. So it's problematic with anything that they're doing. I was reading an article this morning about why is the dollar still heading higher, in the midst of all this, when clearly there are countries that are trying to de-dollarize, Russia and China among them. But he was talking about it being a sign of global dollar shortage that can only be helped if the central banks lower interest rates to spur the creation of new dollars, but they're going in the opposite direction, which is going to lead to rising unemployment and a greater recession or depression in the U.S.
Mm-hmm.
So it's is it party till party until you get hit by the iceberg, or what? Because sane actors don't seem to be in control, or if they are in control, then you think of the free market as this large mechanism that ultimately helps to keep things in balance, but it seems that we've lost that. If we ever really had it, we seem to have lost it in the last 30 or 40 years. Certainly, probably since Nixon went off the gold standard, though that may not have been the whole of it. But what is it that what do you think really can be done to stem the inflation tide at this point, if anything?
I don't know. It's a very good question. I mean, at a minimum, as I see it, if the objective, the conventional narrative is the Fed's going to be hawkish and tighten, and they're going to tighten incrementally. And we're sitting here wondering, are they going to, in the next FOMC, are they going to say, oh, we're going to go 50 basis points or 75 basis points? I mean, inflation's double digits. What is that going to do ultimately? That's not. I don't. Do you know what I mean? That you can't. That can't be viable to really. If you really wanted to stop inflation, what are you waiting for? You would need a Paul Volcker style initiative to really, hammer at. But they can't do that either because of the level of debt service. It's not tenable.
I mean,
so this is. I don't think there is a. I don't think that there really is a solution, a conventional solution that would work for the problems we're facing. So I think this is about power, riding the collapse, steering it as best as they can to, benefit themselves on the flip side of it. Right? We're going to take it down, and we're going to get people so vulnerable, so that, and they're going to do that with debt. They're going to get people so indebted that they will have no alternative but to capitulate to whatever the system demands moving forward. That I think is the plan. Will that work? Most assuredly not. I mean, in the long term, that's not going to work. And so something else is going to have to kick in. I mean, I'm looking at what central banks and sovereigns are doing all across the globe, and they're buying and hoarding gold. Why? And if you ask them, you get a Bernanke style nonsense response like, oh, tradition. Yeah, I mean, okay. Just stop it, right? What are they preparing for? What are they concerned about, right? Where is the real value? And the people who know are banking on the fiat system, not the financialized system, not holding up, right? That's being basically dismantled. I assume that there is some element of control that they exert upon it, and they have some ability to steer it here or there. But I think that to your point, I think that a lot of it is just outside of their control to really do anything about. I don't think you can do much about where we're going, at least in terms of the currency crisis. And that's going to bring into, presumably a credit crisis. And, as Bill Holter says again and again, everything runs on credit. And so we really have to be prepared for a halt of our systems as we come to know them. The just-in-time supply system, all of this stuff. And you and I talk about this all the time amongst our group and community. Relocalization is going to be, I think, the name of the game moving forward. People in their localized communities and areas are going to have to learn how to get what they need from there. And if it cannot be found there, it cannot be found. Let me repeat that. It cannot be found. You will not get it from China at Walmart. You won't go to Costco and buy it in bulk. It won't be available. That's, and I think that everybody knows this. Maybe you heard Macron's little lecture to his public recently where he said, I think he used the turn of phrase, the era of abundance is over. Well, I think that's what he means. I think that's exactly where he's coming from.
Well, it seems to be the era of the kind of abundance that they've been talking about. It's not like we don't live ultimately in an abundant world. Not that we can continue to, strip mine things the way we've done it, but it doesn't mean that there aren't alternatives if we put our minds to it. But it does seem in a certain kind of way that, the centralization, which is of kind of money management and kind of global financial management, the way that works, and kind of what the Great Reset is trying to do, which is kind of a centralization by, AI, Internet of Things, Internet of Bodies, whatever that is, and giving everybody a debit card that can only purchase things that they say you can do, and if you, buy a piece of meat, you'll probably get a carbon tax that they can take right out of your your CBDC account, because they'll have the ability to do that. That's that whole account. They'll just be able to take whatever or stop you from purchasing things that they don't want you to buy, or outside of a certain area, whatever the case may be. So yeah, relocalization, or thinking certainly regionally or bioregionally. If you can see where, if there's certain kinds of uh, resources that are available in your region that might produce energy. I think of, for example, hemp. Hemp can produce oil. Hemp can produce textiles. Hemp can produce food. It's kind of one of those magical things, or other things like that. But it's not going to solve our energy picture right away, it seems to me. And so I don't, I don't know how people are going to get through this winter. I think of these little old ladies who are living off of Social Security, nothing more, which, as you well know, doesn't really pay for anything to begin with. Um, with electric and oil, if they're on oil heat or even electric heat, whatever, or both. In my case, I use both. What are they going to do this winter? And I think I was listening to Catherine Austin Fitts with somebody on one of her recent updates for some solarity. They're saying 123 million households in the U.S., 29 million are already behind in utility payments, already now behind in utility payments. And that's before the winter, before, $4 or $4.50. I don't know what heating oil is today, but it's at least twice as much as it was last year. What are they going to do? You're going to have these defaults. You're going to have a cascade effect, really, through the economy, which I think is what you were pointing to before. A failure here, a failure there. People don't pay their bills. Those companies don't get their money. They can't pay their employees, and their employees can't therefore pay their bills. Or there's great amounts of people being let go of, and we already live in a precarious job economy. And of course, we're getting nothing but lies, 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 and propaganda from all the major players. Whether it's the government or mass media or whatever. How do you relocalize? I can see some degree relocalizing food eventually, like after a year or two, when people get it, like, oh, victory gardens and supporting your local growers. Yeah, I can sort of see us doing that. Maybe not meat so much. Maybe we're going to have to cut down on that. I don't know. But energy in particular, I think, is problematic, just because things like fossil fuels are so energy dense. People don't understand, because we've come to rely on it so much, how much energy is just in a single gallon of gas. It's just huge amounts. If you compare it to like human energy, just the amount of energy and work that you can get from a gallon of gas versus a human, it's astounding. So, what do you see for the future? What do you see as a possible pathway, let's say over the next 10 years, if we're trying to relocalize energy production? What do you see as the best things for us to be thinking about, besides obviously cutting way back?
Well, we're not going to be doing that. We're going to be opening coal mines again. I mean, the local jurisdiction would go back to New Hampshire, would go back to what it did 10, 15 years ago, 20 years ago. That's what they would do. I'm actually not so opposed to all that. I think this whole idea of the fossil fuels being the bane of human existence, and the bane of the Earth's existence, is largely overstated. It's a political talking point more than it's grounded in reality. I mean, I don't think we have a problem with too much CO2. I think we have ecological issues for sure. We have pollution issues for sure. There's a lot of ways that we could approach this. Um, but I think that it's largely energy being used as a weapon wielded against the populace. And I have to assume that what we're before the Great Reset will come the Great Compromise, right? I mean, this is sort of the position that they're putting people in. With the little old lady that you were just alluding to, what will she do? What will all these families do? Catherine Austin Fitts talks about the 29 million households that are already behind. That's only going to increase exponentially. So what will they do? I mean, that is the compromise before them. Well, we can maybe solve this. They'll consider it sort of a debt problem with some grand, scheme that's going to involve a access to a Fed dollar and this kind of thing. I don't anticipate any of that actually working. I think that it's going to ensue a kind of chaos that goes beyond the ability of these central planners to really sort of control and to maintain. So when we are left, there's a popular meme going around now. I think it says expect to self-rescue is the line, and I'm thinking that ultimately that's what it will come down to. And then, as you say, so how do we do that on a more local level? This might sound very radical, and I'm not saying that I have some kind of crystal ball, but I think this fictional modern society that we've come to rely upon that really hasn't done humanity all that much good. In some ways, sure, maybe some things are more convenient, but I think this can disappear almost overnight and leave no memory of what it was. And if our civilization just stopped in 50 years, 5,000 years from now, there'll still be the Egyptian pyramids, but there'll be no memory of, mankind in 2020. I can see that happening. So I could really envision a world that very quickly reverts and what's the word I'm looking for? Demodernizes? Is that the right word? Is that a word? What would you say? But you know what I mean? Like I can see us really just completely altering the way that we're living. I mean, people will go back to relying more on livestock and wood and the way we did 100 years ago than what we have now. And for a lot of people who might hear that and think that sounds really impossible or ridiculous, I'm just not so sure. I'm not trying to be alarmist either. There's a part of me, maybe it's the Luddite in me, that actually might appreciate that. I personally think that the way we're living now, for most people, is beyond our capacity to handle. We're not meant to live this busily. We're not meant to be this inundated, but with tasks and it's our existence is far too complex and far too bureaucratic for most humans to really appreciate. This is why everybody's miserable, and people are walking around with PTSD, just living life in modern America, right? It's not, they don't have to necessarily be subjected to something egregious like war or crime or that kind of trauma. It's just this constant stress of trying to make it, and with all the complexities and the fact that you never have enough. There's you always run out a month at the end of the money, right? I mean, it's beyond our ability to cope with, and it's getting to the point where I think you're clearly seeing that play out in our society. And I think the natural push. I'm on a rant, right? But we are the biosphere. We're part of the biosphere. We're part of the overall organism that we refer to as sort of the earth body. And it has a way of cleansing itself. And she will cleanse it. She'll root us out like a virus. At some point, the antibodies that the earth produces will stop the destructive nature of us against it. And it's not good. We know instinctively that the way we've been living is destructive to the earth at large, yes, but to ourselves, to our spirits, to our family lives, to all that matters. And you can see that pendulum will come back the other way. And I think we're going to be restored to a more organic, natural human existence, and not this artificiality of modernity that we've come to, find ourselves kind of stuck in. I also at the same time, not only are we dealing with this kind of the recognition, the kind of collective recognition that our existence is no longer fulfilling, right? That we're not living sort of natural, organic human existences. We're being forced into some kind of artificiality. And I think clearly the central planners would only make that worse with this whole transhumanistic movement and introducing the biotechnology on humanity and all of these things. And at the same time, I also believe 100% with Lark and Rose that we're watching statism die. It's hard to. I know a lot of people would probably hear that and go, "Oh, come on, Frank! Look, they're winning. They've got all these plans and they've been planning for 100 years." But man, there are exponential. Look, the exponential math proves me right. There are many more people today, exponentially more people, who are questioning the authority of government, who are questioning, the blind obedience of their neighbors, who are recognizing that this body we call government doesn't really have the authority they claim over us. And and you're seeing this all over the place, and you're seeing, and if you're not seeing it play out with your neighbors, you're seeing it play out with the governments themselves in their responses to it. I mean, look how ridiculously authoritarian they feel they need to be. Really, JM, out of nowhere. I mean, this wasn't like this under Obama. Do you remember any? I mean, yes, there was things happening in the government. We had our wars for profit and all of that stuff, but we didn't have, a president label half the country as domestic terrorists and extremists, right? I mean, this is outrageous. I mean, we didn't have these kinds of things. We didn't have these kinds of, well, I mean, I shouldn't say this, but there was always efforts of gun control, but not to the extent you're seeing it now. I mean, they want to just get rid of all firearms and get rid of everybody's ability, and they'll keep the chaotic pressure on those issues by, a lot of people will say things like, don't be violent. The government, that's what they want. Well, I got news for people. They don't need us to be violent. We don't have to do any violence. They do it themselves and then they blame us for it. They just say, you guys are too violent, right? And that's what agent provocateurs are for. And they do this over and over again to push these agendas. There's a fear in the ruling classes that the masses of people are just, to put it in the simplest way, waking up to the societal hoax that they've been subjected to for so long. Now that the system is unraveling, the levels of comfort are dissipating. People are, broke. They're pissed off. They're tired, they're exhausted, they're constantly fighting some level of bullshit on one level, on one aspect or another, whether it's their kids' school or their bullshit job, or there's something irritating almost everybody. And I think that we're seeing the response to this globally, and it's painful. And these mother weffers have lots and lots of power. They have lots and lots of tricks. They can pull lots of levers and turn lots of dials like the wizard behind the curtain. But ultimately, I don't think they could stave off that worldwide recognition that the authority that people have been banking on for all these years is really nothing but a myth.
Yeah, it certainly is it's an opportunity for us to understand the matrix system that we've been part of, and kind of how and where it got off the rails. I mean, capitalism has been seen for many decades as, the best we could do, maybe not great, but the best we could do. But I think you're also talking about a level of, globalization and hyper-financialization that has a lot of corruption built into it. Uh, Going back to Catherine Austin Fitts and her investigation into the 21 trillion or missing dollars, that can't be accounted for in the U.S. government. There's been this grift and graft going on for a huge amount of time. And of course, globalization, this is something Charles Hugh Smith talks about in one of his recent articles about, uh, cities really not being great places anymore. Once they were, of course, magnets for talent and capital because it made sense to concentrate, your workforce and your means of production and, near, like New York City or near ports where you could get things out and in very quickly. But that globalization, because it shifted out production, which then led to financialization, which replaced value-added trading goods with financial instruments and services. And then this is a quote from him here in this article: with hyper-globalization and hyper-financialization, cities became magnets for real estate speculation, global capital seeking, a safe place to park money, healthcare and higher education, status enhancement, conspicuous consumption and entertainment. That is the good life of diverse cultural attractions, neighborhoods, venues, cafes, bars, and nightlife, all of which are the foundations of global tourism, which are now the primary industry in many cities. Obviously, these fueling speculative bubbles, making cities more expensive and leading to really the lack of being able to add value just because of the way it's being sucked off by those very financialized industries. And so one can imagine us now having the opportunity to see, how how it's all made, how it's all put together, and hopefully wake up to that. But the people have to be able to come together and, as with one voice, be able to say that that's enough. And while the globalists maintain control over media and largely over the governments, and I'm thinking of the the USA, the One World Under Blackmail, or I'm not sure what Whitney Webb's new book is, but it's basically about how pretty much all of the anyone in power immediately gets subject to blackmail very quickly. Either through compromising pictures or whatever. Now they can just follow your web history, and if you visit porn sites or do this or that, or they can even plant things. AKA Catherine Austin Fitts having to deal for 10 or 11 years with fake government corruption, basically prosecuting her because they didn't like what she was finding out about how the financial world really worked and the grift that was really going on at HUD and other places. So we're learning this, like you were saying. People are waking up in a way they've never before. But the question is, I guess, how you can see things going down, and you can see, especially when it comes to pocketbook issues, perhaps more even than the COVID issues, which you and I have been talking about endlessly for the last couple of years. Maybe that's really what's going to wake people up significantly, because when they can't heat their houses, that's a problem. When they can't afford food, that's a problem. So I guess we've always been talking about this crossover line where things are getting bad enough for people to kind of get out of their comfort zone and kind of wake up to what's going on, do the necessary investigation, and it's all out there to be seen. I mean, you and I know where to go get the information. There's plenty of people talking about it, even under the instances of great amounts of censorship. If you're talking about financial things, largely you're not censored. Now, if you're trying to, tie it to certain people, in the World Economic Forum, whatever, maybe you will get censored. I don't know, but people can still find information out there. It's available. They haven't shut it down entirely. So, at what point do you see the situation getting devolved enough for enough people to wake up, for them to start speaking with one voice, as we're trying to do, for example, in the event coming up this weekend, or in a couple of weekends, with the Monadnock Gathering of Freedom Groups, people who see what's going on, who can start to speak with one voice, start to act with one voice. Where do you see that crossover point happening, where enough people can wake up to start making a difference in this global hegemonic kind of machine or animal that seems nothing to be interested in nothing but the destruction of the status quo and of communities and families and businesses and governments. It wants to grind it all up, and that's just one part of it. We could talk about the far left extremism of critical theory, and that's also kind of hollowing out schools and nonprofits and governments with, with its practices and theories not based in reason or meritocracy or science, but really based on something else entirely. Um, anti-science, really anti-rational. So where do you think that crossover point might be?
It's it's hard to say. I mean, we could opine on looking at history and then comparing and contrasting to sort of what we see now, and human nature being what it is. I mean, we're still human. We still will respond the same way. When we get hungry, we get angry. I mean, what do they say? It's 9 meals, right? You're 9 meals away from anarchy? Is that what they used to say? I don't
I
like to use
hadn't
the
heard
word
that, but that
anarchy.
does make sense. Yeah.
Basically 3 days,
Yeah.
with that. I will just say, are you going to link that Charles Hugh Smith article? Because that was a brilliant article. And one of the things I really enjoyed about that particular piece was how he's very good at this. I mean, I really think he's the best writer on this particular aspect, is where he has those insights, where he describes the mechanisms happening kind of below the surface that a lot of people tend not to talk about, but are so glaringly important when you see them, when he reveals them. And like in this case, he talks about how the typical powers that would have kept that kind of urban corruption and graft in check, meaning the industrial base, once there's that flight that they no longer could manage, within the cities, you're left with the apparatus, the service apparatus that requires the hyper-financialization to continue. So there's no motivation to put anything in check at all. And it's a really excellent example of how underlying systemic pressures drive decision-making processes, right? Because you and me and our community, we tend to always focus on the personalities. We call out the Bill Gateses and the Klaus Schwabs and the people of power, but we don't often kind of really remark about the underlying systemic pressures. A Kathy Hochul could really only exist in this environment, right? She comes from this swamp, this murk, this sort of this sort of empty bureaucrat, sort of a soulless kind of figure emerging from a milieu of soullessness, of just you know what I mean, right? And it takes that systemic kind of breakdown to get there. It's not all about, strictly speaking, a bunch of billionaires conspiring and planning. That once the systems kind of were put into place, it has a life of its own that leads to this decay. And I think that while you could say that, of course, there's planning and cunning and conspiring and all of that happens, there's no doubt about that. There's an awful lot that falls outside of the control. The mother weffers that we're referring to. Consider them like a sorority, if you will, or a club. Really, in my opinion, ultimately designed to mitigate infighting amongst the corporatocracy, a way to sort of create consensus. So can all of us privileged in this class would yield to the sort of membership, Klaus Schwab being kind of the maitre d' of it, right? To kind of manage it so that we're not slitting each other's throats in the back room. We're letting it play out. We're yielding to the plan, so to speak, to reap the rewards. Kind of like, hey guys, let's all work together to make this happen so we can survive the crash of the system, come out owning all the assets. We'll control all the stuff that matters. Everybody will need us for their housing. Everybody will need us to buy a morsel of food. Everybody will need us to be warm, and then we will control. I mean, this is essentially what that's about. So yeah, I mean, link to that article if you could in the
I
video. I
will.
think people watching this would probably really
Yeah.
enjoy this. Where that line is, you know, it's going to be interesting to see, because I think we're going to see it relatively soon. Um, uh, Comparative advantage is what most of the people are suffering from in the West. we've been made fat, lazy, comfortable, you know, not concerned about, you know, disinterested, easily distracted. We have lots and lots of, you know, I often use the example of Skid Row in Los Angeles. You got 52 blocks of squalor, and as much as these people have been hammered over their heads in life, you can still see them sitting outside their little tents, scrolling through their feeds on their smartphones. And as long as that's still an option, it's hard to get people to motivate them to really kind of take some kind of action, to sort of put their foot down, so to speak. You know, that happens when people have been made soft, essentially. I'm not saying that to belittle people in a way. We all have. We're all soft in many ways, being made harder now as we move through this. And the people who recognize it obviously are you know, going to have an advantage to that. But as long as it still costs more, the cost of doing something is outweighed by the cost of doing nothing, then people will be, you know, passive. They're not likely, and I think that's one of the reasons why you tend to see far more resistance in places like Europe, in my opinion, because the fall was harder. You know, these entitlement states like France, et cetera, you know, that was a huge blow to the way of life, for most French people, where it made them, it was incendiary. You know, it's not like the US. We tend to have a little bit of a different flavor when it comes to things like social benefits and the kind of, you know, government comforts. We're not as accustomed to that. And so I think you see that stuck in their craw in ways in which we haven't quite seen in the US. I mean, we're seeing a movement that's concerned about the wokest stuff that you talked about, critical race theory in schools, and this sort of indoctrination. We're seeing the health freedom kind of groups, because there's health freedom groups now. We have a pretty big one here in New Hampshire. They're all over the country now, pushing against the mandates and the vaccinations and these things. So it comes in pockets, you know, of where people's sort of concerns are. And for a lot of people, as an example, a forced vaccine a mandate that cost people their jobs was enough to get people out, you know, in the streets. I mean, I've been fired now. I lost my income over this. I don't have the ability to say no. What happened to the exemptions? Where did that go? We used to have exemptions for these things, but no longer. You know, so that kind of stuff will motivate people here. And, you know, certainly energy and food is going to get us there. I mean, if we're not able to, you know, provide for our families, if we're unable to keep our homes warm, and I have to think that the establishment class is banking on us capitulating to the offer, to the great compromise, right? That's, I think, you know, where the rubber will meet the road. And I think a lot of people, you're going to probably see an environment where a lot of people will feel they'll have to do what they need to do to be able to keep making the mortgage or what have you. But on the other side, there's going to be a huge demand for anything outside of that system. I mean, you're going to see innovation like we've never seen before skyrocket in the United States to combat that. And they're going to be using every aspect of their power to try to fight those parallel systems, to try to keep us, you know, corral us back into their, you know, barter will be illegal, homeschooling will be illegal. I'm not saying they're going to be successful with this, but you can see that would be. That's why I say optimistically, I don't believe that this is, you know, tenable in the long run. But we have to take our optimism with a big heaping spoonful of dystopia, because that's where these systems go in the end. And knowing that can liberate us, because we see it already. We didn't need to, we know the Stasi state is here, and we know it's going to be built upon. We know that they're going to be doing this stuff. Let's not fear it. Let's not fret it. Let's not get all panicked about it. Let's understand it's already here for the most part. I mean, they've got this little snooping devices and mass surveillance and all kinds of ways to kind of get at us. And yes, they're going to tighten the screws as much as they can, even further. Let's accept that that's how they're going to respond. We know that. And I think once you can accept that that's the way this power reacts to opposition, and then we're more liberated to say, okay, now we're gonna take every initiative we can to go around, cut against, push back, however we can do that. And there's a hell of a lot more of us than there are of them. And all the depopulation agendas at law, I mean, they're going to have to pull something really big out of their hat, I think, to stop that from happening. I don't even know if there's anything they can do ultimately, right? Because I think even if they were willing to sacrifice a city to a bomb or something horrific, I mean, I don't want to get all morbid, but if they decided to so desperate, we're gonna, we'll nuke St. Louis, screw it, to try to get our way. I don't think that's going to work either. It'll be horrific and devastating, but once that mask comes off, it can't be put back on. They have to retreat, and their plan then will be to reinvent themselves as they've done throughout history and come out in a new angle. That has always been the cycle, right? It's the same kind of controllers, but sometimes they're just forced back to the point where they have to just kind of hide in the bushes and regroup and then try to use their resources to come back and find control in another way. And then we're getting wiser to that game as human beings. So there's no doubt in my mind that there is a mass awakening happening, and there's also no doubt in my mind that at the end of the day, we will prevail. Ultimately, I might not see it in my lifetime, but it will happen. There's no doubt about it.
All right. Well, we've reached pretty close to the end of the hour, and I think you put a nice cap on it. We'll continue these conversations and continue to work with our local communities to see what kinds of ideas we can come up with over the next few years to meet the challenges, especially of relocalizing food production, energy production, those necessities, and what we do about technology, as you were saying, I guess is going to be a huge question mark. It's not clear what we'll be able to maintain from our current status, but hopefully there enough sane people will prevail. And I believe the majority of people on the planet are actually kind of sane. There are things that we need to get on top of in terms of our learning as humanity. And that's, not only what we were talking about before regarding politics and financialization and hyper-globalization, but, what we are doing to the planet and the unsustainable nature of certain aspects of the game A system, the kind of competition at any cost kind of system. We do need to evolve through that into something better, something that maintains some level of meritocracy and some elements of free market, but that also recognize that we can't continue to do the things that we've been doing. And as you were saying, hopefully in the process, we can start having these important conversations about what's real, what's valuable, what kind of life we actually want to have, what we think we're here for, which is not to have these bullshit jobs and to have this kind of ceaseless activity that leaves us de-energized and really come back into community and figure out, hey, what are we here to do? How can this be better? And I think that can only end in a good place. It looks like we might have some pain in the meantime while we're divesting ourselves of the other systems. That's just undeniable that that's going to happen. But the more we can come together and have these conversations about what we really want and need, I think the better that transition is going to go. So I'll look forward to the next conversation we have about this, Frank, and really appreciate your time today.
Absolutely. Great talking with you, Jay. And let's do it again soon.
We will. Take care.
All right.
Bye now.